She never meant to hurt anyone. But the moment her trembling hands dropped that cup, sending hot coffee splashing across a stranger's chest, her entire life paused. Shame, fear, exhaustion, it all hit her at once. And the man she struck? A millionaire carrying wounds far deeper than a stained shirt. Neither of them knew it yet. But that painful, messy moment would become the turning point of both their lives. If you've ever wondered how the worst moment of your day could become the beginning of something life-changing, let's step in. The cup slipped from her hand, and before she could even form a breath, it exploded against the stranger's chest. The winter air caught the rising steam, twisting it into pale ribbons that drifted upward like a small, embarrassed ghost of the breakfast she had hoped to enjoy. Mara Jensen froze where she stood, her boots half on the icy curb, half on the slush of the Chicago street. The noise around her, honking cars, shuffling commuters, a bus groaning at the light, blurred for a moment. All she could see was the spreading stain on the man's crisp white shirt. He looked down at it slowly, almost too slowly, as if giving her one last chance to undo the moment. Then his eyes lifted, sharp and startled, darkened by the kind of day that had probably already gone wrong before she spilled anything on him. "What the hell?" he said, voice low but edged like metal. Her face burned even before the wind slapped against it. She tried to step back, almost slipping on a patch of thin ice. I'm sorry, I didn't see. Your car stopped too fast. It's an intersection," he snapped. Behind him, the black SUV idled, exhaust curling in the cold. He had just stepped out, one polished shoe on the pavement, when her foot caught a shallow pothole and the cup jerked out of her hand. It had all happened in seconds. The kind of accident that wasn't anyone's fault, but fate had chosen to hit them both at the worst possible moment. She swallowed hard. "I said, I'm sorry. It was just coffee." "Just coffee?" His voice tightened. "It's all over my coat. Do you even watch where you're going?" Her humiliation flared into something hotter than the spilled drink. She crossed her arms instinctively, though her fingers were still numb from the cold. "You came out of nowhere. And maybe try not jumping out of your car like you own the whole street." His eyebrows rose, insulted. "It was an accident. A careless one." The word dug into her, careless, because all morning she'd tried so hard not to be. She had already spilled oatmeal on the counter, already forgotten to record one of her mother's medication doses, already rushed out the door with a knot in her stomach that felt like it had been there for months. A few commuters slowed down, glancing over with that quiet urban curiosity that wasn't quite concern. One woman whispered something. A teenager raised his phone, angling it discreetly, as if this small human collision might become the most interesting thing he saw today. Mara felt her chest tighten. Great, perfect. Just what she needed, strangers watching her worst moment of the week. "I don't have time for this," the man muttered, brushing at his stained shirt. The coffee had soaked deep into the cotton, seeping under the lapel of a tailored wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His jaw clenched as he looked at the mess. Then he lifted his gaze again, and his eyes held a tiredness that startled her, not sharp anger this time, but disappointment. As if the world had done this to him, and she was just the final straw. He exhaled sharply. "People like you should pay attention." "One so." The words hit her harder than the cold wind ever could. "People like you." She felt them land in the softest part of her chest, right where she kept her unspoken exhaustion. She didn't even know what he meant. Hurried people, clumsy people, stressed out people carrying too much. But it didn't matter. Her mind filled in all the rest. She bit down on the inside of her cheek. "Hard. People like me," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "Right." He seemed to realize something too late, her expression shifting, the faint tremble in her hands, but he didn't take the words back. He just stepped around her, muttering under his breath. The teenager lowered his phone. A bus hissed at the curb. The light changed, and Mara stood there, rooted to the icy sidewalk, breath rising in small white clouds. Her coffee cup lay near the tire of his SUV, crushed slightly at the edge, the lid rolling in a soft circle like it couldn't quite settle. She finally crouched to pick it up, fingertips stinging against the cold plastic. Her eyes stung too, though she blamed the wind for that. She threw the cup in a nearby trash can and straightened, pulling her coat tighter around her. Humiliation coiled in her chest, but something else tangled with it. Anger. Frustration. The ache of a morning that felt too heavy before it even began. She didn't know why that one sentence echoed so loudly inside her. Maybe because she'd heard versions of it before. Maybe because she was already too close to breaking. A nearby taxi honked. Someone brushed past her. She stepped back onto the sidewalk and forced herself to breathe, but the cold air only made the tightness sharper. She told herself she'd forget it by noon. She told herself it was nothing. Just a moment between strangers. But as she walked away, she kept hearing the same 4 words in the back of her mind, words that shouldn't have mattered, yet somehow did. People like you? The phrase followed her down the block, down the next street, and into the rest of her morning, clinging to her thoughts like a stain she couldn't scrub out. And though she didn't know it yet, the man with the ruined shirt would return to her day in a way she never expected. Why, she wondered as she pushed open the door of the office building. Did that single sentence hurt so much more than the spilled coffee? And why couldn't she shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time she'd see him? No one began the day ready for a fight, unless they'd been fighting alone for far too long. That thought hovered around Mara later that morning, long after the coffee had dried on her gloves and the humiliation had cooled into a dull ache behind her ribs. But the truth was, the fight hadn't begun on the sidewalk. It had begun hours earlier, in the dim kitchen of her small Chicago apartment. She had stood barefoot in front of the sink, blinking at the dishes stacked like a silent accusation. The early light through the window was pale and cold, turning the faucet into a shard of silver. Her mother hummed faintly in the next room, the same off-key tune she repeated on mornings when her memory got stuck in the past. Mara had paused with her hand on a chipped mug, listening, waiting. Some mornings her mother was sharp enough to ask if it was Tuesday. Other mornings, she didn't remember the season. Today was the second kind. "Mom?" Mara called gently, drying her hands on a towel. "Do you want oatmeal or eggs?" Her mother appeared in the doorway, gray hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger when confused, softened somehow, and that always pierced a place deep inside Mara. "Oatmeal," her mother said after a long moment. "Your father likes oatmeal." Mara swallowed the grief without showing it. Her father had been gone 5 years. She made the oatmeal, stirred in the cinnamon, set out the pill organizer. When her mother hesitated, unsure which compartment was for the morning dose, Mara slid it closer and smiled as if it didn't hurt to see this tiny stumble. She kissed her mother's cheek, pretended everything was normal, and tried not to let the worry settle into her shoulders. Only after she'd checked the mailbox, packed her bag, and double-checked the locked door did she let herself feel the weight of another day where she was needed in every direction and nowhere at all. And then, of course, she spilled coffee on a stranger. Across the city, in a tower of glass and steel that reflected the gray February sky, Grant Walker had begun his morning staring out over Lake Michigan from his penthouse window. The lake was freezing at the edges, the water dark and restless beneath shifting clouds. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Insomnia had crept in over the past year, a quiet thief that robbed him nightly and left him pacing the hardwood floors before dawn. His father's portrait hung over the mantel, a reminder he didn't ask for. Walker Properties had once been a modest firm. Under his father it had grown into something formidable. Now, keeping it alive felt like keeping a ghost satisfied. Too many investors, too many decisions, too many people who expected him to be his father's son without faltering. His sister had stopped speaking to him after their last argument, a heated fight about the company, about legacy, about who had sacrificed more. She'd moved to Colorado after that, announcing she needed space from the family machine. He didn't blame her, but he also hadn't known how to make it right. He rubbed his temples, staring at the lake until the horizon blurred. The condo was immaculate, polished counters, expensive furniture, everything placed with intention, but it felt colder than the view outside. Too quiet, too clean, too empty. He grabbed his coat, hoping the brisk air might shake off the fog in his head. It didn't, and by the time he stepped out of his SUV later that morning, his nerves were pulled taut enough that a splash of hot coffee on his shirt felt like the universe taking one more swing at him. He'd snapped. More sharply than he meant to. More tired than angry, though he doubted the woman knew the difference. People like you should pay attention. He regretted it almost immediately, but pride and the stain on his shirt kept him from saying anything else. By the time he sat in his office, jacket draped over a chair, he could still hear the quiet hurt in her voice. A knock interrupted him. "Sir?" his assistant called. "Your mother is on line 1. That alone made his throat tighten. His mother never called early unless she wanted something. He picked up the phone. "Mom? Grant?" "Sweetheart," she said with that overly bright tone he recognized too well. "I'm having a small dinner this Saturday. Just a few people, nothing big. I want you there." He closed his eyes. "Mom, we've talked about this. You hardly visit anymore," she continued, ignoring the warning in his voice. "And this dinner is important. You know I don't ask for much." She didn't need to say what she really meant, that she wanted her children in the same room again. Wanted the family she remembered, the one that didn't exist anymore. He knew she missed his sister desperately. He missed her too, but neither of them knew how to fix the distance. "Please come," his mother said softly. "For me." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, staring at the stain on his shirt as if it were evidence of the day unraveling. "I'll think about it. At least that," she said, before hanging up with a sigh that lingered in his ear. He set the receiver down, jaw tight. Not with the insomnia, not with the company's financial reports sitting in his inbox like a threat. And somewhere at the edges of his mind, he saw again the woman on the sidewalk, the crushed coffee cup, the way her shoulders had slumped after his careless words. He wondered briefly who she went home to, who she fought for, what weight had been pulling her down before he added to it. That same evening, in her apartment on the west side, Mara was rinsing the last of the dinner bowls when her phone rang. She dried her hands on her jeans and checked the screen. It was her mother's best friend, Evelyn, one of those women who made pots of soup for neighbors and inserted herself into everyone's business with the gentlest intentions. "Mara, honey," Evelyn said without preamble, "your mom told me she wants you both to come for dinner this weekend. Just a small group. You'll be there, won't you?" Mara blinked, surprised. "This weekend?" "Yes. It'll be good for her. And for you too, don't argue. I already told her you'd come." End of the sign. You see, end of the sign taxes. Mara leaned against the counter, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle in again. "Do more than try, sweetheart. She needs this." The call ended before Mara could say anything else. She stood there for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling a strange tug in her chest. 2 invitations. 2 separate lives. And something in both calls felt like the beginning of a path she hadn't meant to step onto. Why, she wondered as she turned off the kitchen light, did it feel like the same kind of storm was gathering for both of them? She told herself she'd stay for 1 hour, maybe less. That promise was the only thing that got Mara through the late afternoon as she stood in front of her closet, staring at the same 3 tops she rotated for anything vaguely social. Nothing looked right. Nothing felt right. She caught her own reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes. Hair she hadn't had time to trim in months. A faint crease between her brows that had settled there this past year like a permanent resident. Her sister, Lila, sat cross-legged on the bed, arms folded, watching her like an older sibling who had run out of patience years ago but still showed up. "You're going," Lila said. "End of story." "I'm not in the mood for dinner," Mara replied, tugging a sleeve into place. "You're never in the mood," Lila countered, "and Mom is excited. That alone is reason enough." Mara knew that was true. Her mother had been humming all morning, repeating the same question, "What time do we leave?" as if the repetition might anchor it in her mind. Still, the idea of walking into a room full of people who remembered better versions of their family made her stomach twist. Lila slipped off the bed, stepped behind her, and adjusted the collar of Mara's sweater. Just show up, eat something, smile once, then you can leave. Mara exhaled. 1 hour. Fine, Lila said, but wear the navy one. You look like yourself in that. Across the city, Grant stood in front of his own mirror, adjusting the cuffs on a shirt he didn't even like. His mother had insisted on something nice, which meant something stiff. He could have ignored her request. He was a grown man, nearly 48, but guilt had a way of slipping under the door no matter how much he tried to lock it out. He ran a hand over his jaw, noticing the gray creeping into his stubble. Another reminder of time he couldn't slow down, of years that felt heavier recently than they once had. He told himself he was only going because it mattered to his mother. Because it was easier than explaining, again, why these things drained him instead of bringing him closer to his family. A text buzzed on his phone. "Don't be late, sweetheart. Everyone is looking forward to seeing you." He sighed. Everyone meant his mother and whatever friends she'd roped into this dinner. It did not include his sister, who had stopped responding to invitations months ago. He tried not to think about that now. Tonight was already enough. He grabbed his coat and keys, telling himself he'd stay an hour. Maybe less. The sky had already deepened into a muted blue by the time both cars rolled through the quiet suburbs north of Chicago. Bare trees lined the street like silhouettes, and patches of old snow clung to the edges of driveways. Porch lights blinked on one by one, dotting the neighborhood with a soft glow. Mara drove her aging Honda carefully, gripping the wheel a little too tightly. Lila and her mother chatted softly in the back seat, but Mara barely heard them. She was rehearsing excuses in her head. Early morning, long week, not feeling well, each one half-hearted, because she knew she'd end up staying longer than she intended. She always did. Grant's SUV turned onto the same street, his hands loose on the wheel, but his jaw tight. He'd grown up not far from here. His childhood home was only a mile away, though he hadn't set foot inside it in years. As he slowed near the address his mother had texted, he felt a strange tug of memory mixed with resistance. The house came into view, a warm, tidy colonial with a wreath on the door and soft yellow light spilling through the windows. The kind of house that radiated comfort for anyone but him. He parked along the curb, switched off the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. He could still turn back. He could text his mother a polite excuse, but he didn't move. A car pulled up behind him, Mara's Honda. She didn't notice him at first. She was helping her mother step out of the back seat, one hand steady on her mother's elbow. The small gesture, patient, practiced, protective, caught him off guard. He recognized the posture. He'd seen it in hospitals and waiting rooms, in people who carried more than they ever admitted. He stepped out of his SUV just as Mara glanced up. The shock was instant. Her breath hitched. His shoulders locked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mara's first thought was disbelief. Not him. Not here. The memory of coffee splashing across his shirt flared hot in her mind, followed by the sting of his dismissive tone. Her pulse quickened, not with embarrassment this time, but with the dread of being seen again by someone who'd already caught her at her worst. Grant felt something sink inside him. The woman from this morning, the one he'd snapped at, the one he'd brushed off with a careless comment, stood only a few feet away, her expression a mixture of surprise and guardedness. And he looked just as stunned as she did. He adjusted his coat, cleared his throat, and started toward the house. He could pretend not to know her. That would be the easiest route. But when he drew closer, their eyes met again, and ignoring her suddenly felt impossible. Mara looked away first. Her mother tugged gently on her sleeve. Evelyn said she made roast chicken. Right, Mara murmured, forcing her breath steady. Grant reached the porch steps just ahead of them. He hesitated with his hand on the doorknob, aware of their presence behind him. Mara avoided his gaze, whispering something soft to her mother. He opened the door and stepped aside. "You can go ahead," he said quietly. She startled at the sound of his voice. Not sharp like earlier, not cold, just tired. "No, it's fine," she replied, careful to keep her tone neutral. Their mothers appeared in the foyer in the same moment, voices bright, arms open. pulling guests inside with the eager warmth of people who believed they were orchestrating something wonderful. Neither Mara nor Grant had the heart to tell them they were wrong. They stepped over the threshold, two reluctant guests holding more bruises than anyone could see, and the door closed behind them with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary and something baking in the oven. Laughter floated from the dining room, coats rustled, chairs scraped. A cheerful chaos, but all Mara could feel was the weight of the man standing just a few feet away. And all Grant could think was how complicated this evening had suddenly become. She told herself she'd stay for 1 hour, maybe less. But now, as they found themselves in the same house, at the same dinner neither wanted, a single uneasy question formed in her mind. One she wasn't ready to answer. Should they pretend they'd never met? Or was pretending even possible anymore? Her breath caught. His jaw tightened. For an instant the room seemed to hold its own breath, as if even the warm air hovering above the dinner table sensed the collision waiting to happen. Mara stood frozen in the entryway, her mother's hand resting lightly on her arm, while Grant straightened instinctively, shoulders squared, eyes narrowing, not in anger this time, but in recognition. "Oh, wonderful, you've arrived," Evelyn called out, bustling forward with the kind of warmth that left little room for objections. Mara forced her legs to move, though she felt as though she were wading through thick, invisible water. Grant stepped aside to let them pass, and for a moment they were close enough for her to sense the faint scent of his cologne. Sharp and clean, nothing like the burnt bitterness of the morning's coffee. She kept her gaze on the floor, hoping he wouldn't speak. He didn't. Instead, they followed Evelyn through a hallway lined with family photos and soft yellow lamps, toward a long dining table that glowed under a row of candles. The flickering light gave the room a gentle warmth, shadows dancing across faces filled with anticipation. "Mara, honey, sit here," Evelyn said, guiding her to a chair. "And Grant right there, across from her." "Perfect, perfect." Mara almost laughed at the word. Chairs scraped. Silverware clinked. Someone poured water. Her mother smiled at everyone, with polite confusion, already losing track of who was who. Lila whispered reassuringly to her, then took the seat beside Mara. Across the table, Grant lowered himself into his chair, posture controlled but undeniably stiff. The candlelight reflected off the rim of his glass, lighting one side of his face while the other remained in shadow. It made him look even more unreadable. "Mara, dear, this is Grant Walker," Evelyn announced proudly, as though presenting two puzzle pieces she believed would fit. "He's been a friend of the family for years." Grant cleared his throat. "We've met." Mara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She clasped her hands under the table to keep them still. "Yes," she said quietly. "Earlier today." "Oh, that's wonderful." Evelyn beamed, misreading the tension. "Chicago feels like a small town sometimes, doesn't it? Small enough to crash into each other twice in one day." Apparently, conversation flowed around them, updates about children, bits of neighborhood gossip, remarks about the weather. Mara nodded in the right places, offered small comments when necessary, but her awareness kept circling back to the man seated across from her. Under the table, her leg bounced with nervous energy. Beside her plate, her napkin was folded and refolded into uneven shapes. She could feel the pressure of Grant's silence, like a weight pressing lightly on her chest. He looked calm enough, but his right hand tapped against his thigh, a steady, controlled rhythm only someone watching him closely would notice. She wondered if anyone else saw it, probably not. "So, Mara," one of the older guests asked, "how's work at the clinic? Your mother mentioned you cut your hours." A knife turned in Mara's stomach. She glanced at her mother, whose expression was gentle but unfocused. "Yes," Mara said slowly. "Just part-time for now." "That must be a relief," the woman replied. "More time for yourself." "More time for yourself." Mara hesitated. "Something like that." Across the table, she felt Grant's eyes on her, a brief, flickering awareness. She didn't meet his gaze. The conversation shifted to real estate, then to local taxes, to the endless churn of suburban updates. When someone asked Grant about the Walker Properties expansion, he straightened slightly. using the familiar topics like a shield. "It's going slow," he said. "Construction delays. Market fluctuations. Nothing unusual." His tone was even, but Mara sensed exhaustion behind it, a strain she recognized in her own reflection on difficult mornings. She studied him briefly, wondering what kind of pressure carved lines around his eyes. "Business is business," a man commented. "Your father handled it well." Grant's jaw tightened. "My father isn't here to handle anything anymore." The table quieted just long enough for the candles to flicker in the uneasy silence. Mara felt a strange pull of empathy, unexpected but warm. She understood what it meant to lose a parent, to carry responsibility without a map. Dinner continued, the earlier tension softening just enough for Mara to breathe more easily. Still, every glance she stole across the table felt like stepping too close to a fire, too bright, too sharp, too revealing. Her thoughts spiraled around the same dilemma: swallow her pride or defend herself. But the morning had been messy, and she had been harsh, and the humiliation still clung to her ribs. Midway through the meal, while plates were being cleared and a new dish was set on the table, Grant leaned slightly forward. His voice was low, meant only for her. "I owe you an apology." She looked up, startled. He kept his gaze steady, though there was a softness there she hadn't seen before. "What I said earlier was out of line. I spoke without thinking. I shouldn't have." Mara blinked, unsure what to do with the sincerity in his tone. A quiet apology shouldn't have had such an effect on her, but something about it loosened the knot in her chest. She waited for defensiveness to surface, but instead felt only a gentle unraveling. "You were having a bad moment," she murmured. "That doesn't excuse it." His words hung between them, simple and unadorned. The candles flickered, their glow landing on his face, softening the edges she'd only seen as harsh this morning. She wanted to accept the apology. She wanted to let it go. But hesitation slipped in, quiet and unsettling. Something told her this wasn't just about spilled coffee anymore. Something deeper had begun shifting, too small to define, too significant to ignore. She exhaled slowly, fingers brushing the edge of her napkin. Why, she wondered, did forgiveness feel like such a dangerous step tonight? On the porch, the cold night softened what anger couldn't. Mara stepped into the darkness first, needing air that wasn't crowded with voices and good intentions. She wrapped her arms around herself, letting the cold bite through her sweater. The faint hum of the dinner continued inside a blur of laughter, clinking dishes, footsteps drifting room to room. Out here, only the wind moved. She closed her eyes for a moment. The evening had stretched longer than her promised hour, tangled with small talk and the weight of sitting across from the man she'd spilled coffee on mere hours before. She thought stepping outside might help her shake the tension. But when she opened her eyes, she saw another figure emerging from the warm light of the doorway. Grant stepped onto the porch, hands in his coat pockets, breath rising in slow clouds. He hesitated when he noticed her, as if deciding whether to retreat or face the inevitable awkwardness. She almost wished he would choose the first option. Almost. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said quietly, pulling the door until it clicked shut behind him. "You're not," she replied, her voice softer than she expected. "Just needed a minute." Grant nodded, stepping a few feet away, giving her space without walking back inside. The two of them stood there in a thin slice of winter between the porch light and the shadowed yard. Snow clung to the edges of the wooden railing. The night was so cold it made everything seem sharper, the air, the silence, her awareness of him beside her. For a moment neither spoke. Finally, Grant exhaled. Tonight was unexpected. That's one word for it. He gave a weary half-smile. The first thing resembling softness she'd seen from him. "I think our families could meddle in meddling. Mine certainly could," she said, glancing back through the window at her mother and sister chatting animatedly. "They mean well. They just get carried away." He followed her gaze. Silence again. But this time it didn't feel hostile. Just full. Mara shifted slightly, her breath visible in thin white wisps. "About earlier. Today." The words caught in her throat, tangled with embarrassment she wished she could hide. I didn't handle it well. Grant shook his head. You had every right to be upset. I was abrupt. That comment, people like you. I shouldn't have said that. He looked at her fully then, the porch light catching faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. You deserved better than the way I spoke to you. The sentence landed gently, but its sincerity surprised her. Her shoulders loosened. Something inside her, still braced for judgment, slowly eased. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. He seemed relieved she didn't brush him off. She nodded. Same here. A gust of wind pushed against them, rustling the shrubs near the porch. Mara tucked her hands into her pockets. Our families, she began carefully. They have this idea in their heads. About dinners, invitations, meetings. She gestured vaguely toward the house. I think they want us to connect? Grant huffed a soft, humorless breath. My mother is convinced I'll magically turn into the version of myself she used to show off at parties. Successful, married, predictable. And mine, Mara said, is convinced if she puts me in enough rooms with enough people, I'll suddenly forget all the things I'm juggling at home and just float into a perfect new life. He tilted his head, studying her profile. Is that why you came tonight? For her? Partly, she admitted. And partly because saying no to people who care feels harder than it should. The porch light flickered faintly, casting warm patches of gold across the wooden boards. Their breaths mingled in the cold, rising and fading like small, hesitant confessions. After a moment, Grant spoke again. What if we found a way to take some pressure off? Just temporarily. She turned toward him, curious but wary. What do you mean? He shifted his weight, gathering the words with care. Our families are enthusiastic. If we don't step in, they'll run with their own ideas. Maybe we find a middle ground. Just for a little while. Middle ground? A truce, he said. Make dinner interactions less chaotic. Less expectation. Mara blinked at him. So we pretend we're… What? Getting along? He shook his head. No performance. Just calmer. Unified front. He paused. No romance, no assumptions. No anything. She exhaled a laugh, soft and surprised. A no-strings alliance? Exactly. She looked out at the dark yard, thinking. Her instinct was to say no. She hated the idea of being managed, of playing along with something she didn't fully choose. But the truth was, she was tired of being scrutinized. Tired of the gentle pressure. Tired of feeling like every step she took was being measured by people with hopeful eyes. What's in it for you? She asked. It keeps my mother from planning my future without asking me, he said simply. And it might give you some breathing room, too. She considered his words in the quiet cold. She didn't trust easily, not strangers, not luck, not the idea that cooperation could ever be simple. But he wasn't pushing her. He wasn't promising anything unrealistic. He was offering a month of calm where she didn't have to fend off everyone's wishes alone. Okay, she said finally. 1 month. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. 1 month. Their breath mingled again, forming pale clouds between them before dissolving into the night. For the first time since that coffee cup slipped from her hand, she felt something unclench inside her, a small, cautious easing. But as she stood there beside him, wrapped in the soft hum of a truce neither had expected, a different thought pushed quietly to the surface. If they were going to spend time together, even just to ease their families, what would that actually look like? And why did the idea unsettle her almost as much as it steadied her? She didn't expect to sit across from him again, especially not with a calm cup of coffee between them. Yet here she was, sliding into a small corner booth at Willow and Main Cafe, where the air smelled of roasted beans and warm pastries, and the windows framed the soft gray of a late winter morning. Grant was already there, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug as if grounding himself. He stood as she approached, a gesture so quiet and old-fashioned it caught her off guard. "Grant." She tried to sound neutral, but her voice carried a hint of something softer. They had chosen this cafe because it was halfway between their homes, neutral ground, neither too personal nor too distant. She had driven there, wondering whether she should have canceled. He had arrived early, debating whether this whole truce idea had been a mistake. Now, sitting across from each other, the tension felt different. Something in the middle, tentative, careful. A waitress placed menus on the table, smiling at them. When she left, neither reached for the laminated pages. Mara placed her palms on the warm mug, letting the heat soak into her cold fingers. "So," she said, "we're really doing this." Grant let out a quiet breath that could almost have been a laugh. "I guess we are." She studied him briefly. Without the coat and the rush of morning traffic, he looked less defensive, more human. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, signs of long nights and heavier days. "Sleep any better after last night?" she asked before she knew the question had formed. His eyes lifted in mild surprise. "Actually, no." She frowned slightly. "Insomnia?" "Most nights," he admitted. "It's gotten worse over the past year." She nodded slowly. "I get that. Nights can feel longer when you're carrying too much." She hesitated, choosing her words. "My mother's condition. Some nights I'm up with her. And on the nights I'm not, I'm lying awake thinking about everything that could go wrong." Grant leaned back slightly, studying her with a new seriousness. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she said with a soft, humorless smile. "But she's my mom." "So." Something warm flickered across his face, not pity, but recognition. A shared weight. They fell into a quiet lull, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The kind of silence that came from two people trying to decide how much of themselves to show. "So," she said gently, "what keeps you up?" "If you don't mind me asking." He looked down at his mug, tracing the rim. "The company. My father's legacy. Trying to do right by everyone while feeling like I'm not enough." He paused. "And the silence of the apartment doesn't help. It's strange how a place can be expensive and still feel empty." Mara softened at that. "Lonely?" He nodded once, as though admitting it cost him something. She let her fingertip brush the side of her cup. "I know the feeling," she said quietly. "Some days, I feel like my whole life is split between taking care of my mother and holding myself together just enough to go to work." Grant didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick solutions. He simply listened, which was more unexpected and more comforting than anything he could have said. The waitress returned briefly with fresh water. When she left, the corners of Grant's mouth tugged upward. "You know, I keep thinking about the coffee incident." Mara groaned softly. "Please don't." "It wasn't your fault," he said. "I mean it." She raised an eyebrow. "Even though you told me I should pay attention?" His cheeks reddened slightly. "I was an idiot that morning." "That makes two of us," she admitted. For the first time since they met, they both laughed awkward, surprised, but genuine. The sound warmed the space between them, loosening something tight in Mara's chest. She sipped her coffee. "So, this truce of ours. How exactly is it supposed to work?" Grant rested his elbows lightly on the table. "We stay civil. Friendly, even. Help each other manage expectations. Show our families we're stable and not in need of nudging." Mara nodded. "And, in exchange, we get a month of peace." "Peace," he repeated, as if the word were a luxury. Their fingertips rested only inches apart on the wooden tabletop. The closeness was accidental, but neither moved away. Mara looked down at her mug. "I've been scared to slow down. To pause. Because I'm not sure who I am outside of being responsible for everyone." Grant exhaled as if her honesty had cracked something inside him. "I haven't slept well in months," he said, "and half the time, I'm pretending I'm still in control of everything." Her gaze lifted. "Why did you tell me that?" "I don't know," he said softly. Maybe because you look like someone who understands. A quiet pulse moved through the space between them, gentle but unmistakable. Not romantic? Not yet. More like two people recognizing the echo of their own fatigue in someone else. Mara glanced toward the window, watching a light snow begin to fall. "You feel—" she murmured. He followed her gaze. "You do too." They sat there for a while, sipping their coffee, sharing small fragments of their separate lives, work frustrations, aging parents, regrets about things unsaid. Humor surfaced here and there, tentative but real. At one point, Grant made a dry comment about the neighborhood's parking signs, and she almost choked on her drink laughing. It felt unexpectedly easy, unexpectedly honest. When the mugs were nearly empty, Mara leaned back, letting her fingers rest lightly against the warm ceramic. The moment felt fragile, like something that would disappear if either of them moved too quickly. Grant glanced down at their hands, separated by only a few inches of table. "Strange," he said quietly, "how a day can start with a mess and end with this." "This?" she repeated. He searched for the right word. "Clarity. Maybe connection. I'm not sure yet." Her pulse tightened. "Does that scare you?" "A little," he admitted. "Does it scare you?" She hesitated. "More than I expected." A draft from the door carried the scent of cold air into the cafe. She shivered, not from the chill. When they finally gathered their things and rose from the booth, she felt something lingering, something she didn't dare name. He held the door for her, letting the cold morning wrap around them both. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, she found herself wondering why the honesty they'd shared felt heavier than anything else that had passed between them, and why she couldn't shake the sense that this conversation would stay with them long after the snow melted. They were supposed to pretend. Instead, they kept forgetting where the pretending ended. The late afternoon sun spilled across the backyard in long, honey-colored streaks. Laughter drifted from the grill, where Grant's mother and two neighbors argued about marinades, while the younger cousins tossed a football near the fence. Mara stepped into the yard beside Grant, telling herself this was just another checkpoint in their one-month pact, nothing more. But the moment she entered the warm buzz of voices and saw people glance toward them, expectant, curious, her pulse stumbled. Grant sensed it. He angled slightly closer, not touching, but offering steady presence. "It's just a barbecue," he murmured. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You're optimistic." "Not really, just pretending." His eyes warmed. "We're good at that now, remember?" She opened her mouth to reply, but a relative swooped in before she could speak. "There they are. You two." The phrase hit them both with equal, quiet force. They followed her to the patio table, where a cluster of family friends sat with iced tea and paper plates. Questions came quickly: how they met, what they'd been up to lately, whether they had weekend plans. Mara felt heat prick the back of her neck. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. But each time she hesitated, Grant stepped in smoothly. "Oh, Mara's been busy with work," he said when someone asked about her job. "She's juggling a lot right now," he added when another person asked about her hours. "She's the organized one," he joked when someone teased him about showing up late. He never spoke for her. Just beside her, supporting without overshadowing. It surprised her how natural it felt. When someone asked how long they'd known each other, Grant glanced at her, waiting for permission to answer. She found herself smiling despite the awkwardness. "A while," she said, choosing the safest half-truth. Grant nodded with a small, almost invisible relief that warmed her chest. They moved through the gathering like a pair who'd done this before, passing plates, sharing small comments, exchanging quiet looks when someone said something absurd. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed so much in one evening without forcing it. As the sun dipped lower, the light changed. The backyard seemed dipped in gold, shadows stretching long across the grass. Mara brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, and when she looked up, Grant was watching her, not with intensity, but with a softness she wasn't prepared for. She quickly looked away. They found themselves seated side by side on a wooden bench near the porch, while others mingled around the yard. A bowl of potato salad rested between them, mostly untouched. Someone behind them turned on a playlist of soft classic rock, and Mara caught herself swaying slightly to a familiar tune from decades ago. Grant noticed. "You like this era?" he asked. She shrugged. "My dad used to play this song every Saturday morning." "It suits you," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean something?" "It means," he said, choosing his words, "you look like someone who grew up with real music." The comment was simple, but it hit her with a surprising tenderness. She hadn't been described that way in years. A group at the grill burst into loud laughter, drawing Grant's attention for a moment. Mara studied him in the warm light. He looked softer today, less guarded. She wondered if everyone else could see it too. A child tossed a football that landed near their feet. Mara bent to pick it up. As she did, her hand brushed Grant's knee, a light touch. Barely there, but enough to send a flicker of heat through her. She pulled back quickly, murmuring an apology. "It's fine," he said, voice low. Really. There was something different in his tone. Something she didn't dare examine too closely. The gathering went on, and the two of them navigated it with surprising ease. When Grant's mother insisted they take a couple's photo, just for fun, Mara felt her body stiffen. Grant noticed instantly. "We don't have to," he said quietly, leaning slightly toward her. But his mother was already waving a phone in their direction. Mara hesitated, caught between discomfort and the warmth of the day. Grant stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the steady presence of him beside her. "Only if you're comfortable," he added. Her throat tightened at the unexpected gentleness. Slowly, she nodded. They stood together near the edge of the yard. Sunset poured behind them, turning the air warm and amber. Grant angled slightly so their shoulders nearly aligned. When the camera lifted, he glanced at Mara as if making sure she was all right. She felt seen, really seen, in a way that pulsed deep inside her. The photo was snapped. Grant stepped back, giving her space again, but the warmth of his nearness lingered on her skin. Later, as people filtered toward the serving table for dessert, the two of them wandered toward the quiet side of the yard near a line of maple trees. The last of the sunlight touched the tops of the branches. They stood there, a comfortable silence settling in the space between them. Mara rubbed her hands together lightly. "They're convinced we're something." Grant exhaled. "I noticed. And we didn't exactly discourage them." "No," he admitted. "We didn't." A breeze swept gently through, carrying the scent of charcoal and late winter air. As Mara stepped aside to let someone pass, her balance wavered slightly on the uneven ground. Instinctively, Grant reached out. His hand rested on her back. Warm, gentle, protective. She froze. Not because it startled her, but because of how natural it felt, how her body didn't flinch or pull away. Grant realized the closeness and started to withdraw his hand, but she paused him with a faint, involuntary shift toward him. Just enough to say, "It's all right, you don't have to move." He let his hand linger 1 second longer than necessary. A small, charged second. Then he stepped back, but the warmth remained. Mara's breath caught. This was supposed to be pretending. So why, she wondered, did it feel like something else entirely? Why did it feel real? In the quiet of his car, there were no families watching, no audience, no script. Just the soft hum of the engine and the low glow of the dashboard washing their faces in muted blue. Mara sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the faint fog her breath left on the passenger window. Grant paused before shifting into drive. "You warm enough?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." He waited, giving her space. He'd learned she needed that room to gather her thoughts the way others gathered courage. They pulled away from the curb, the neighborhood lights flickering across the windshield. The world outside moved slowly, softened by fresh flakes beginning to fall. Mara watched them drift toward the glass, melting on contact. There was a strange comfort in the quiet, the kind that came not from silence but from being next to someone who didn't demand anything from her. I haven't felt that relaxed around people in a long time, she murmured. Grant flicked a glance at her. The barbecue? She gave a small, tired laugh. A quiet beat stretched. Grant's fingers tightened subtly around the steering wheel. Not in tension, but in carefulness, as if he was afraid to misinterpret her meaning. I felt it too, he admitted. More than I expected. She shifted slightly in her seat, exhaling a long, slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It's strange, she said softly. We barely know each other. And yet, her voice trailed off. Tangled in a fear she couldn't quite name, Grant didn't finish her sentence for her, didn't rescue her from it. He let it linger, as if he understood the weight of unspoken things. They drove for a few minutes in easy silence. Streetlights drifted across their faces, pale gold blinking into cool shadow over and over. Mara watched the rhythm of it, feeling the way it brushed warmth across her skin, then left her in the dark again. It scared me a little, she admitted finally. How natural today felt. Grant let out a long breath. I thought I was imagining that. You weren't. He slowed at a stop sign, the tires crunching softly over thin snow. His profile, lit by amber streetlight, looked older, softer, more vulnerable than she'd seen before. Mara, he said, voice low. I don't want to assume anything. But, did today feel like pretending to you? She looked down at her hands. Not all of it. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just waited steady, patient, bracing himself for whatever came next. I've spent years, she said slowly, shrinking parts of myself just to make life manageable. Caring for Mom, cutting back work, trying to keep everything from falling apart. I haven't let myself want anything new. Her voice tightened. Anything good. Grant turned the car toward a quiet side street lined with old maple trees, their branches hanging low under thin blankets of white. He pulled to a slow stop, letting the engine idle. And now? He asked. Her breath clouded in the chilled air of the car. Now I'm wondering if I'm allowed to want something again. The honesty hung fragile between them. Grant swallowed once, the movement visible in the dim light. I know what it's like, he said softly. To feel like wanting something new means betraying everything you've been carrying. He paused. After my divorce, I told myself I was done. But today, it felt different. She turned to him, her pulse unsteady. He met her gaze, steady and unguarded. Like maybe I don't have to be alone in all this. The words settled deep inside her. A gust of wind brushed the car, sending snowflakes skittering across the windshield. Inside, the air felt warmer than it had all night. Grant, she whispered, I don't know where any of this is going. I don't either. I'm scared. So am I. They sat suspended in that truth, both afraid, both uncertain, both drawn to something they hadn't expected to find. Mara watched a streetlight glide over his features again, tracing the faint lines of exhaustion, the heaviness beneath his eyes, and something gentle blooming there. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't lean closer, didn't rush toward whatever this was. Instead, he said, we can go slow. We can figure it out one step at a time. Her chest tightened with something warm and aching. Can we? He nodded. Only if you want to. She looked out the window for a moment, watching the way the world moved, slow, quiet, delicate under falling snow. Her voice barely above a breath. I think I do. The air shifted, softly, almost imperceptibly. Grant lifted a hand, hesitated, then brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers were warm, gentle, weighted with care rather than urgency. Mara's eyes fluttered closed. When she opened them, he was watching her with an expression so careful it nearly broke her. She leaned in first an inch, then another. He met her halfway. Their lips touched lightly, tentatively. The kiss deepened only because neither pulled away. It tasted of winter air, quiet fear, and something hopeful taking its first breath. When they finally parted, Mara leaned her forehead against his. Her heartbeat felt like a small, trembling thing between them. "Grant," she whispered. "What happens now?" He didn't answer right away. The question lingered in the dim light of the car, in the thin hush of snow drifting past the windows, in the warmth still echoing on their lips. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, everything had shifted. Love grows quietly, but family expectations were loud. Mara realized this the moment she stepped into her mother's living room the next morning. The TV murmured softly from the corner, and her mother sat wrapped in a knit blanket, a half-finished cup of tea cooling beside her. But instead of drifting into her usual mid-morning calm, she brightened the instant she saw Mara. "Honey," her mother said, patting the seat next to her. Mara forced a gentle laugh as she sat down. "Just a good evening, Mom. Nothing big." But her mother leaned closer. "I know that look. There's someone, isn't there?" A knot tightened low in Mara's belly. It was too soon, too new, too fragile to name. "Mom, it's not." Her mother's eyes shone with a warmth Mara hadn't seen since before the dementia symptoms began. "I'm just glad. You deserve to be cared for too." She paused, hand trembling slightly as she squeezed Mara's fingers. "Don't wait forever." The softness in her mother's expression almost broke her. Mara carried that weight with her the rest of the day, the warmth and the pressure tucked beneath it. She wasn't ready for any of this. Across town, Grant wasn't faring any better. His mother cornered him in her kitchen, a whisk in hand and determination in her posture. "You looked happy yesterday," she said. "Mom, it's been years, Grant. You're allowed to move on. You're allowed to want a life again." "I never said I didn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's just new, but promising." She nudged him lightly with her elbow. "Your father would be thrilled." That landed too heavily. His father's memory always did. Grant felt something twist inside. The expectation, the legacy, the unspoken hope that he would build a future that looked the way the family imagined. When he stepped out of the house later, he felt squeezed from every side. By late afternoon, they met for a walk near the small shopping district not far from Mara's neighborhood. It was cold enough that their breath fogged in the air, but not so cold that they couldn't linger on the sidewalks lit by warm storefronts. They walked close, but not touching, wrapped in the quiet that came naturally between them. "You look tired," Grant said softly. "So do you." He let out a breath. "My mother's already imagining things." Mara almost laughed. "Almost." "Mine too." They stopped at a crosswalk, shoulders nearly brushing, watching cars pass. "I don't want this to become something we're performing," she whispered. "Not for them." "I don't either," he said, but her gaze softened. "Still, a part of me liked seeing Mom so happy this morning." His lips twitched with understanding. "I get that." They walked on. Snowflakes drifted from a pale sky, catching briefly in Mara's hair. She brushed them away absently, trying to steady her breath. But then they passed a jewelry store, a narrow display window glowing with warm spotlights and rows of rings arranged like tiny constellations. She didn't mean to look. Her gaze just slipped over. And there it was. Her reflection still, hesitant, troubled. Grant followed her line of sight and immediately understood the shift in her expression. "Hey," he said quietly. "No one's thinking about that. Not me, not now." "I know," she said quickly. "It's just, everything feels like it's moving faster than we are." He stepped closer, but not too close. "We get to choose the pace." But she shook her head faintly. "Do we?" Because today felt crowded. Crowded with hopes not theirs. Dreams not ready to be dreamed yet. Grant's shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for my family to make this harder." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "It's just life. People want good things for us, and somehow it makes me feel like I'm slipping, like I'll wake up one day and realize I've lost myself again." Grant opened his mouth to reassure her, but the words tangled. He recognized the fear. He lived with his own version of it, being swallowed by the expectations tied to his last name, the company, the memory of his father. But the guilt of dragging her into that without meaning to lodged heavy in his chest. They kept walking, though more slowly now. The easy warmth between them felt slightly altered, still there, but tense at the edges. "Mara," he said quietly, "what do you need right now?" She hesitated. "Too long?" "I don't know," she said finally, "but I think I need a little space." The words stung more than he expected. Not because she was pulling away, but because he knew he'd contributed to the pressure closing in on her. He nodded once, slow and careful. "Okay." They reached a small bench near the end of the block. She sat, folding her hands tightly together, as if fighting the urge to apologize for her own fear. Grant stood for a moment before sitting beside her, close enough to be present, far enough to respect the boundary she'd drawn. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't want to hurt you. You're not," he said. "I just don't want you to feel trapped." She swallowed. "That's the thing. I'm afraid I might start to. Not because of you." The snow thickened. A quiet flurry settling on coats, on the street, on the jewelry store window behind them. Grant looked out toward the passing cars, jaw tightening. "You're not." She turned to him. "But I don't know how to fit anything new into my world without dropping something important. And you don't want to feel controlled," he said softly. She nodded. He let the truth sit between them, real, heavy, complicated. "Take whatever time you need," he said, voice steady but dimmer at the edges. "Just don't shut me out completely." Her breath trembled. "I'm not trying to." But she stood a moment later, brushing off her coat, creating a space he didn't follow into. He watched her step away, still close enough to reach, but emotionally drifting farther with each second. She paused before crossing the street, looking back at him with an expression that held more conflict than she could speak aloud. Was this fear? Or self-preservation? Or something deeper she didn't know how to let herself have? Grant remained on the bench, his breath forming small clouds in the winter air, and he wondered quietly, painfully, whether he should fight for her or step aside before he became the weight she feared. The brunch was supposed to be small. It turned into a stage she never agreed to stand on. Mara sensed the unease the moment she stepped through the front door of Grant's mother's house. The smell of cinnamon rolls and baked ham filled the air. But beneath it was something sharper, voices, too many of them, layered over one another in that bright dining room. She hesitated in the entryway, tugging lightly at her sleeves. She didn't remember agreeing to something this crowded. Grant touched her elbow gently. "I thought it was just my mom and sister," he murmured. "You thought?" She echoed, exhaling through her nose. "Not great words for someone with my level of social bravery today." He offered a rueful half-smile, the kind that told her he was just as thrown. But when they entered the dining room, it became clear this wasn't a simple breakfast. The long table was already full. Neighbors, family, friends, cousins she didn't recognize. Conversations hushed briefly as every head turned toward them. "There they are," Grant's mother announced, her voice a warm trumpet. "Sit. Sit. We were waiting for you two." "You two," the words echoed in Mara's ribs. Her pulse thudded once, hard. She forced a smile, but her throat felt tight, like a cord was pulling from inside. She sat beside Grant, trying to disappear into the chair, while everyone else leaned forward with eager eyes. Questions started instantly: how they met, how things were going, what their plans were. And though she had survived the barbecue, this felt different. Heavier. Intrusive. Grant reached for a serving spoon, offering her potatoes first. A small gesture. A small anchor. She nodded gratefully and placed a tiny scoop onto her plate, her appetite nowhere to be found. "So," Grant's mother began, folding her hands with too much excitement, "I think it's safe to say everyone can feel it." Mara's fork froze. "Feel what?" Several guests chuckled knowingly. Grant shot his mother a warning look, but she pushed on, oblivious or unwilling to stop. "You two are perfect together." Grant inhaled sharply. "Mom, we've all been hoping for this," she continued. "And I told Linda," she gestured to the neighbor seated across the table, That I wouldn't be at all surprised if we had big news by spring. Mara blinked. Hard. The air in her lungs thinned. She could barely form words. Grant's mother smiled, almost trembling with joy. An engagement, sweetheart. A few people gasped theatrically. Someone clapped. Someone else said, "It's about time Grant found a good woman." Mara's vision tightened at the edges. The room felt smaller, louder, too bright. She tried to breathe, tried to swallow the rising wave pressing against her ribs. She caught the glimmer of silverware, the movement of hands, lips forming words she couldn't hear over the pounding of her own heartbeat. An engagement, people cheering, eyes all on her, a future she hadn't agreed to. Being pulled over her like a heavy winter coat she couldn't shrug off. Grant's hand brushed her forearm, a subtle plea. "Stay with me, don't disappear inside your head." But her body had already begun to retreat, curling protectively inward. "I think," she whispered, "there's been a misunderstanding." The table quieted, too quickly, too completely. Grant's mother blinked, confusion cutting through her excitement. Grant stepped in quickly. "Mom, this is too much. We haven't talked about, but you kissed her at the barbecue." His mother laughed gently. "We all saw." Mara's breath caught. Suddenly, the kiss, private, tender, fragile, felt stolen, held up like evidence she never meant to offer. "Mara," someone said, "you must be over the moon." Over the moon. She felt underwater. She set her fork down. Her pulse hammered loud enough to drown out every voice at the table. The room swayed just slightly, and she gripped the edge of her chair to steady herself. A memory flashed, her old life shrinking around her piece by piece until she barely recognized herself. Caring for her mother. Losing ground at work. Becoming small, smaller, smallest. Not again. Not now. Not when she had just started to feel her lungs work freely again. Grant's voice cut through the air, low and urgent. "Mara, look at me." She tried, but her eyes burned too much to hold his. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him. "I can't." He shook his head gently. "You don't have to do anything. We can step outside, right now." But the attention wouldn't stop. More questions. More assumptions. Someone joked about ring sizes. Someone else asked about dates in the fall. Her body made the decision before her mind could catch up. She stood abruptly. "Mara?" Grant's voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry," she said again, though she didn't know to whom. Her vision blurred. "I need air." She slipped away from the table, ignoring the startled murmurs that rippled behind her. The hallway felt too long, her breath too fast. She pushed open the front door and stepped into the cold morning. The December air hit her like a plunge into icy water. Her chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. She wiped at her cheeks, though the tears kept coming hot against the cold wind. Behind her, footsteps approached the porch. "Grant." "Mara, please," he said softly. "Wait." She froze, but didn't turn. "Talk to me," he pleaded. Her shoulders trembled. "I told you," she said, voice breaking. "I can't." "Then let me help you." She shook her head. He stepped closer, but not enough to crowd her. "Just stay, we'll leave together." She closed her eyes. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But everything felt too big, too loud, too dangerous again. Slowly, painfully, she stepped down onto the walkway. "Mara," his voice cracked, "please don't walk away from me." She paused. Just long enough for him to hope. Then she whispered, "I have to." And she walked into the cold, leaving him standing alone on the porch. Some decisions took years to form, then arrived all at once. Grant felt the truth of that as he stood in his mother's hallway, the faint scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. He hadn't gone inside far, just enough to face her without the shield of a crowd. She approached cautiously, worry knitting her features. "Grant," she began. "I didn't mean to upset her, I thought." "That's the thing," he said softly. "You thought. But you didn't ask." She blinked, taken aback by the calm steadiness in his voice. He wasn't raising it. He wasn't angry. If anything, he looked tired, tired of being pushed, tired of letting others decide what his future should look like. You know I only want what's best for you, she insisted. He nodded. I believe that. But this, pushing for something I'm not ready for, something she's not ready for, that's not love. It's pressure. His mother's shoulders sagged a little. You care about her. Yes. The word left him without hesitation. I do. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that asked for honesty from both sides. Then go, she whispered finally. Go find her. Make things right. For the right reasons this time. He exhaled, a slow release he hadn't realized he'd been holding on to, and stepped back toward the door. Before leaving, he touched his mother's hand briefly, a gesture of gratitude and boundary both. Outside, the cold wind slapped his face awake. He didn't know exactly where Mara would go, but he knew where he went whenever the world caved in: Lake Michigan. The shoreline had always been a quiet place where the noise of expectations couldn't reach. He drove fast, though not recklessly. Snow flurries ghosted across the windshield. The sky hung low and pale, stretching wide above the frozen water. And then there she was, a solitary figure on a lakeside bench, her coat pulled tight against the wind, her hair lifting in dark streams behind her. She stared out across the water as if searching for a horizon she could trust. Grant slowed, parked, and stepped out, breath fogging instantly. For a moment, he just watched her, seeing the curve of her shoulders, the weight she carried alone. Then he approached, careful not to startle her. Mara, he said gently. She didn't turn right away. When she did, her eyes were red, not from crying recently, but from having cried enough. Grant, she murmured. You shouldn't be here. He shook his head. I needed to be. A gust of lake wind swept between them. He winced at the cold but stood firm. She looked back toward the water. I'm not angry, she said. I just felt cornered. Like everything was slipping out of my hands again. I know, he said quietly. She let out a shaky laugh. You can't know. He took a slow step closer, not touching her, just letting her feel his presence. Mara, I've spent years letting other people decide who I'm supposed to be. I've let my family's expectations dictate every step I take. Her breath caught. He lowered himself slowly, kneeling beside her, not in a gesture of proposal, not in spectacle, but in simple humility. The wind tugged at his coat, and his hair fell across his forehead. I don't care about the plan, he said, voice steady and low. Not the timeline, not the assumptions, not the image. I want you. Not the version they imagined. You. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I'm sorry you were hurt, he continued. And I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm choosing this. Choosing us. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Tears welled again, soft and unbidden. She blinked them away, though one slipped free and clung to her cheek before the wind carried it off. You say that, she whispered. But what if I can't be enough? Not the way they want. Not the way you deserve. Grant's expression deepened, not pity, not regret, but recognition. He reached for her hand, slowly enough that she could refuse him if she wanted. She didn't. His fingers curled around hers, warm despite the cold air. I don't want someone who fits a mold, he said. I want someone who feels like home. And that's you, Mara. When you're strong, when you're scared, when you're trying, when you're unsure. All of it. Her breath trembled at his words. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, grounding her. What if I get overwhelmed again? She murmured. Then I'll slow down, he said. Or stop. Or just sit beside you. Until you're ready to move again. A small, pained smile tugged at her lips. It isn't, he admitted. But it's worth it. Wind whipped across the bench, carrying the sharp scent of winter and lake water. Mara stared at him, really stared, taking in the honesty etched into every line of his face. No bravado, no pressure. Just truth. She swallowed. Grant, I'm scared." "I know," he said, eyes soft. "So am I." Her shoulders loosened. Just slightly. Enough. She squeezed his hand, and he let out a breath that shook with relief. "So," she said, voice quiet but steadier. "What now?" He stood, helping her rise beside him. The lake stretched wide behind them, the horizon a thin silver line between cold sky and colder water. "We rebuild," he said. "Slowly, carefully, on our terms." She nodded, her gloved hands sliding naturally into his. But even as warmth bloomed through the cold, a question lingered, not fear, not doubt, but the weight of the unknown. What would rebuilding really look like? And were they ready for the work it would ask of them? Some homes weren't built, they were mended. Mara felt that truth growing in the small, ordinary moments that began to stitch her days with Grant into something unexpectedly soft. It started subtly. The way he showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with her favorite brand of soup after a long shift, or the way she instinctively texted him when her mother had a confusing evening and nothing seemed to calm her. Now, weeks after the lakeside confession, their worlds blended in a way that felt less like merging and more like leaning two separate lives, finding spaces where the edges fit gently. On a quiet Thursday morning, she stood at her kitchen counter, slicing apples for her mother, while Grant brewed tea behind her. The winter sun filtered through the curtains in faint stripes, dust floating lazily in the warm air. The kettle clicked off, and Grant poured water into 2 mugs with practiced slowness. "You take honey, right?" he asked softly. "Just a little," she said. He smiled. "I remember." The simplicity of that stirred something deep in her, a tenderness wrapped in gratitude. She'd spent years doing everything alone. Now someone remembered how she liked her tea. Her mother shuffled into the kitchen, blinking at the light. Grant greeted her gently, as he always did, with warmth and patience. Mara watched from the counter, noticing how easily he adjusted, slowing his speech, offering a steady hand when her mother hesitated near the table. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. But it meant more than most people realized. Later that afternoon, when Mara took her mother to an appointment, Grant went back to his office downtown. He had a demanding day, full of calls and paperwork and decisions that weighed heavily on him. Yet, between meetings, he found himself replaying the morning, the soft clatter of dishes, the smell of apples, the quiet comfort of sharing space with her. When he returned to her house that evening, the sky had deepened into early winter blue. Lights glowed in the living room, where Mara sat cross-legged on the couch, paying bills with a stack of papers spread around her. A soft blanket pooled near her feet. "You look buried," he said gently. She glanced up, tired but relaxed in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "I'm fine. Just budget stuff." "Want help?" She paused. Not because she doubted his sincerity, but because letting someone help felt vulnerable in a different way. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I do." He settled beside her, their shoulders brushing just slightly. They sorted through envelopes, reviewed numbers, adjusted columns. At one point, their hands grazed, and neither pulled away. As the evening settled, Mara's mother wandered in with a book she couldn't quite remember the plot of. Grant listened as she tried to piece together fragments, nodding patiently. Mara watched them, her heart catching on the image. Grant leaning forward, genuinely invested in her mother's words, making her feel valued despite the confusion. When her mother eventually drifted off to bed, Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You're good with her," she murmured. Grant shrugged softly. "She matters to you. That makes her matter to me." Her chest tightened again, not with fear this time, but with something warm and dissolving. They ended up in the kitchen later, cooking a simple dinner together. Roasted chicken, steamed carrots, and mashed potatoes. He chopped while she seasoned. They moved in an easy rhythm, stepping around each other, sharing small jokes about the recipe, bumping elbows in the narrow space between the stove and counter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. When the food was ready, they ate at the small table near the window, watching snow fall outside in soft waves. The world felt slower, quieter, safer. After dinner, they brought 2 mugs of tea into the living room. The house had grown still, save for the hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the old wall clock. 2 mugs of tea cooled slowly between them as they talked late into the night. "What scares you most about us?" Grant asked, his voice low, steady. She hesitated, staring into the amber liquid in her cup. "I've done that before. Bit by bit, without noticing. And I'm afraid I won't see it happening until it's too late." He nodded, absorbing every word. "I understand. What scares you?" she asked. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. She looked at him then, really looked. The exhaustion, the sincerity, the desire to do better than his past, had allowed. "That's not who you are," she said softly. "It's who I've been," he replied. "But I'm trying. I know." He reached across the small table, offering his hand without demanding anything. She took it, threading her fingers with his. The house felt warmer suddenly. Minutes passed, like quiet breaths. Then, Grant's voice broke the soft stillness. "Mara," he said, steady but careful. "Can I ask you something?" Her pulse flickered. "What?" He didn't stand. Didn't kneel. Didn't shift in some grand gesture. He simply held her hand a little tighter and said, "Are you ready for a life together? Truly together. Not rushed, not pressured. Just us." Her breath stilled in her chest. The question wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a plan. It was an invitation to something steady, something mutual, something real. She looked down at their joined hands, the warmth of his palm bleeding into hers. Her fears were still there, shadows flickering at the edges, but so was something bright and quiet, something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I don't know yet." Grant nodded slowly, not hurt, just present. "Take your time," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth of that settle. When she opened them, he was still looking at her with patience, not expectation. Mara squeezed his hand gently. "I want to try," she said. "I want to see where this can go." He let out a breath that sounded like relief and hope all at once. The snow outside thickened. The tea cooled. And the house around them felt less like a place and more like the beginning of something they were building, not quickly, not perfectly, but together. Yet even as warmth filled the room, a quiet question lingered in Mara's chest. Trying was one thing, but could she truly step fully into this new chapter? Their wedding wasn't grand, it was honest. Mara felt the truth of that the moment she stepped onto the small patch of backyard grass behind Grant's house. The place they had chosen not because it was elegant, but because it felt like them. The afternoon light filtered through the bare branches, spreading long, gentle shadows across the uneven ground. A thin line of string lights swayed softly in the February breeze, glowing faintly even before the sun fully dipped. Grant stood near the wooden arch he'd built himself, simple cedar, sanded smooth, decorated with white winterberries and a few sprigs of pine. Nothing extravagant. Nothing loud. Just steady, warm, quietly beautiful. Her breath hitched when she saw him. Not because of the suit, though he looked good in it, but because she remembered all the moments that had led to this one. The spilled coffee, the anger, the slow thaw, the porch truce. The laughter that pulled them closer, the fears that nearly broke them, the choice his and hers to stay. He turned when he sensed her steps. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The world around them seemed to pause, letting them take each other in. Mara's dress was simple. Ivory, soft fabric that moved easily with the light wind. No veil, no train, no fuss. Grant's eyes softened when they met hers, the kind of softness she'd once convinced herself she no longer deserved. Only about a dozen people were present: siblings, a couple of close friends, their mothers. Chairs were mismatched. The aisle was just the narrow path between 2 rows of late winter grass. But to Mara, it felt like something sacred. Her sister squeezed her hand before she walked forward. "You look happy," she whispered. Mara nodded, unable to say more. Grant watched her approach with the quiet awe of a man who had nearly lost the chance to love again and knew it. When she reached him, he offered his hand slightly, hesitating just a fraction, giving her the space to choose. She slid her fingers into his without hesitation. The officiant, a longtime friend of Grant's father, began speaking. But Mara heard little of the formal words. Her heartbeat softened into a steady, warm rhythm, syncing with the feel of Grant's fingers wrapped around hers. Then came the vows. They had written them separately, agreeing only that they would be true, not perfect, not poetic, just real. Grant went first. He unfolded a small slip of paper, exhaling as if releasing years of tension. "Mara," he said, his voice low and steady, "I spent years thinking I had to carry everything alone. And when I met you, I realized how heavy loneliness had become." His eyes shone, unhidden. "You taught me patience. You taught me dignity. Not the kind that comes from status or success, but the kind that comes from showing up, even when things are hard. I don't promise perfection. I promise presence, and a partnership that honors who we are, not who others think we should be." Mara swallowed hard. The slip of paper in her hand fluttered in the wind. Her turn. She lifted her vow, hands trembling slightly. "Grant," she began, "I lived a long time thinking I had to stay small to survive. Quiet, careful, always bracing for the next thing to go wrong." She paused, eyes lifting to his. "And then you showed up not to fix me, not to save me, but to walk with me, to stand with me in my messy days, to laugh with me when laughter felt impossible." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "I promise to be honest, even when it scares me. I promise to rest when I need to, and to let you rest too. And I promise to build a life with you, not fast, not forced, but steady and true." Grant blinked hard. She did too. Their mothers dabbed their eyes quietly. The winter air carried the sound of soft sniffles and the faint creak of the string lights swaying above them. The officiant stepped back, smiling gently. "If you both consent to this union," he said, "you may seal it with your promises." Grant lifted her hands, holding them with a reverence that startled her. Not because she didn't think he cared, but because she'd never been held like that, without expectation, without fear, without hurry. When they said, "I do," it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it carried a weight that settled deep in Mara's chest, warm and steady, anchoring her to this moment. This choice. This man. They kissed, not the tentative, searching kiss from the car weeks ago, but something sure, gentle, grounded. The kind of kiss that understood where they had come from and wasn't afraid of where they were going. Their families clapped softly. Grant's mother cried quietly into a handkerchief. Mara's sister squeezed her from behind. But all Mara felt was Grant's hand in hers, warm and steady, holding her with a certainty she had thought belonged only to other people. Afterward, they lingered under the string lights while guests drifted into the house for food. Mara looked up at their intertwined hands, the image illuminated softly by the warm bulbs overhead, her fingers wrapped with his. Two pasts, two stories. Two lives that had once run parallel, now aligned. By choice, by effort, by something like grace. Grant leaned closer, his voice a low whisper near her ear. "Are you happy?" She didn't rush to answer. She let herself feel it. The backyard, the lights, the crisp air, the warmth of his hand. The steady beat of something new, beginning. She nodded slowly. "I am," she said. "And I'm grateful." He exhaled, relieved and softened all at once, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Yet even in the glow of the moment, a quiet curiosity flickered inside her, a small, lingering question about the life that awaited them after this gentle ceremony. What would it look like to truly build a future chosen freely, without fear, without rush, without the shadows that once defined them? The night air held the question tenderly, waiting with her. Months later, she handed him a cup of coffee, steady, warm, intentional. The early light slid across the kitchen floor in long, pale stripes, catching the steam as it curled up from the mug in her hand. The house was still. the rest of the world not quite awake yet. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock kept them company. Grant sat at the small wooden table by the window, glasses perched low on his nose as he skimmed through a stack of papers he'd brought home, numbers and notes that once would have claimed all his attention. This morning, they waited quietly on the table. Mara set the mug down in front of him. Dark roast, splash of cream, 1 sugar. He looked up, and the way his face softened just at the sight of her still startled something tender inside her. "You're welcome." She moved to her own chair, across from him, setting her tea down beside a folded dish towel. Outside the window, dawn slowly painted the sky over the rooftops, blue fading into soft gold. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. This was their favorite time of day, now, before phone calls, before appointments, before the weight of caregiving and work, and all the little demands of life settled on their shoulders. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full. "How's your mom this morning?" Grant asked, wrapping his hands around the mug, soaking in the warmth. "Still sleeping," Mara said. "She had a good night. Woke up around 2, a little confused, but she went back to bed pretty quickly. I think the new nighttime routine is helping." He nodded. "Good. I'm glad." She watched him take his first sip, eyes closing for a moment in appreciation. She'd learned his rhythms the way he'd learned hers. The way he needed silence before 9, the way a second cup of coffee was his signal that he had a heavy day ahead. She could see from his relaxed shoulders that this morning wasn't one of those days. "Your sister called yesterday," she said. "She wants us over for dinner next week." He chuckled. "She wants another chance at beating you at cards." "She's never going to beat me at cards." "You're very confident for someone who bluffed with a terrible hand last time." Mara laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "Guilty," he said easily. They sat like that for a while, trading small bits of conversation, letting silence fall when it wanted to. There was no need to fill every space. The comfort lay in knowing the other person would still be there when the quiet lifted. Mara glanced at the clock. "I have about 30 minutes before I need to start breakfast for Mom. And I have about 30 minutes before these numbers stop behaving themselves," Grant replied, tapping his papers. "Seems we're on the same schedule." She sipped her tea, letting the warmth travel down into her chest. Her gaze drifted to the small framed picture on the wall near the doorway, a snapshot taken in their backyard the night of their ceremony. String lights overhead, the faint outline of bare branches, and the two of them facing each other, foreheads nearly touching. She remembered how afraid she'd once been of losing herself. Sitting here now, in this small kitchen that smelled like toast and coffee and something like home, she realized she hadn't disappeared. She had expanded. "Penny for your thoughts," Grant said gently. She blinked, realizing she'd been staring at the photo. "Just thinking," she said, "about how far we've come." He followed her gaze. Her lips curved. "You remember the look on your face?" "I remember the coffee on my shirt," he said dryly. Then his expression softened. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "I didn't either," she admitted. "I was just tired, angry, scared of everything changing." "And now?" he asked quietly. She thought about their blended routines, the nights they'd spent on this very couch talking through fears instead of hiding them, the way his presence had become a steady thread in the fabric of her days. She thought of his mother learning to ask instead of assume, of her own mother's small moments of clarity when she smiled at Grant and said, "He's good for you," even if she didn't always remember his name. "And now," she said slowly, "I'm still scared sometimes. Life is still a lot. But I'm not scared of us anymore." He reached across the table, palm up. The invitation was simple, familiar. She slipped her hand into his, feeling the warmth, the quiet strength. The morning sun finally cleared the neighboring rooftops, spilling into their kitchen in a soft, golden wash. Dust motes floated lazily between them. Their two mugs sat side by side, steam rising in thin ribbons. "Grant," she said after a moment, her voice gentle, "can I tell you something ridiculous?" "Those are my favorite kind of things," he replied. She smiled, looking down at their joined hands. "Sometimes, When I pour your coffee in the morning, I think about that first day. How different it was. How much it hurt. And how, if it hadn't happened, we might never have met. He watched her quietly, letting the memory settle between them without flinching. She looked up, eyes clear. "I'm glad you stopped that day," she whispered. His expression softened into something that held both the man he'd been and the one he'd become. They sat there, their hands resting together on the worn wood of the table, their drinks slowly cooling, their hearts steady in a way neither had imagined possible a year before. There was no grand revelation, no sudden shift, just the gentle knowing that they were exactly where they needed to be. Two people who had once been broken open by hardship, now held together by choice. Mara turned her gaze toward the window, watching the light spread across the quiet street. Cars began to appear, neighbors starting their day, the world moving in its familiar, imperfect rhythm. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been: the anxious daughter, the overworked employee, the woman who believed love belonged to other people. And she thought about the woman she was now, sitting in a small kitchen with a man who had seen her at her weakest and stayed anyway. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. And in the quiet of that shared morning, one small thought drifted through her mind and lingered there, soft and wondering. What if the hardest moments in life were never meant to break them, but simply to turn their steps slowly, painfully toward the people who were always meant to stay? Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, often in the moments we wish had never happened. What Mara and Grant found isn't a fairy tale. It's something quieter, more honest. The realization that two people can be bruised by life and still meet each other with gentleness. That love, when it finally arrives in its steady, grown-up form, doesn't demand perfection. It asks only for presence, for the courage to stay when things feel uncertain, and the softness to listen when old fears rise again. There's a quiet truth tucked inside their story. Some of the hardest turns in our lives aren't detours away from who we're meant to become, but pathways toward the people who will walk with us, not ahead of us or behind us, but right beside us. And sometimes, the moment that feels like a breaking point is simply the beginning of something that will hold us together more firmly than we imagined. If you've ever felt tired or late or afraid you'd missed your chance at joy, may this story remind you that life has a way of circling back with unexpected kindness, and that it is never too late to be met with a love that feels like home. Thank you for spending this time with us, and for letting this story accompany you for a little while. Your presence here truly matters more than you know. If the story touched your heart, a simple like, share, or subscribe helps us continue bringing gentle, human stories into the world. Stories that remind us we're not alone. Wishing you a quiet evening, a warm cup in your hands, and a little bit of peace wherever you are.